Hello friends, Namaskar. Welcome to Dr.RAjeshverma's YouTube channel and let us discuss something about the classical methods of psychophysics. As you know, we have discussed the meaning, definition and various problems of psychophysics in previous videos. So in this particular video, we'll be talking about the what are the methods, rather classical methods that are used for the studying the psychophysics. These are the you can call it these are two methods or the three or four methods. That is the classical methods. They are the backbone of the psychophysics. The Fechner developed three tools to measure the relationship between intensity of a stimulus and subsequent perception. So the major tools or you call it a classical methods. These tools are called classical methods of psychophysics and employed to measure the stimulus threshold, whether it is a differential threshold or absolute threshold. The threshold has been defined. This very important point in the psychophysics is threshold. It has been defined as a stimulus value, which is perceptible in 50% of the trials. I think you know this point very well because this is a very you call it the premise or central theme of the psychophysics. Any stimulus that is perceptible in 50% of the times, that value or that intensity is considered as the threshold of the particular stimulus. The methods are used to ascertain the AL, that is absolute lemon or a raised lemon or absolute threshold, and DL, or that is differential threshold or differential lemon of the stimulus. So these are something we call it the you call it history or basics or background of these methods. Now, what are the methods? Fechner, I told you that he gave three methods of psychophysics. The first one is these are first you call it there are three methods: methods of constant stimuli, methods of limits, and method of adjustment or average error. Some people call it the average error, while some call it the method of adjustment. By and large, both are the same. So let us define each method with its consequent graphical representation as well as examples in little bit in detail. So first we start with the methods of constant stimuli. Define in this method a set of stimuli. See, every word in this full paragraph or slide is very important because I have not written exhaustively. I have written all the very important points in this slide. So you have to be very careful while reading or listening to these words. First one is set of stimuli, which some are above the threshold and some are below the threshold, are used repeatedly during the procedure or an experiment. Whereas Geseder recommends 5 or 9 different values of the particular stimulus. Means in a set, he said that there should be at least either 5 or 9 different values of the stimulus. Now the basic point comes here, or you call the basic question, why this method is known as a constant stimuli? Yes, this is a very fundamental question raised by various students. So let me say a few words in this support of that. In answer of that question, why it is constant stimuli? Because the set of a stimuli, there is one stimulus that is sound, or visual stimulus, touch, or any stimulus you take it. The values of the stimulus remain constant throughout the experiment. For example, a subject is made to hear a bass sound of 60 decibel. Now suppose sound is your stimulus. Here, one stimulus will not remain always constant. Values, the different values, that is, some values will be above the threshold, perceived threshold, and some will be below the threshold, and across the experiment, till that experiment is over, these values will remain constant, fixed. That is known. That's why this method is known as method of constant stimuli. Suppose we have asked an individual to, or you have made an individual to hear a sound of 60 decibels. We call it a bass sound because we have some bass. We have to set a baseline to a certain what are the values that is above that and that values below that. So then the individual may be presented with 5 different levels of sound. Now you know 60 is the bass sound. Now you have to, as per the guider's recommendation, we have to present at least a set of 5 stimuli. And one important point again is when you present a stimulus, in that case, that values must have a systematic or proportionate difference or equal difference. That is 40, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. See, these are equal difference of 10 decibels. So this is also we have to keep in mind while performing this experiment. So one individual has been made to hear a sound of 60 decibels. That is not a part of that set of stimuli which has to be presented to a individual. Getting my point? So you are given a sound of 60 decibels. Now you have to offer or you have to present a set of 5 different value sound. You just your device, it's a 30 degree, 30 decibel, 40 decibel, 50 decibel, 60 already we given, that is a bass, 70 decibel and 80 decibel. Is it 5? Okay. Now across the experiment to various individuals or that if different times the same individual, these values of the stimulus will remain always constant, and that is known as method of constant stimuli. One more important property of this stimulus, this method is these values are presented in random order. That doesn't mean that first you present 30, then 40, then 50, then 70, 80. No, in that case there is an expectation error or there is a practice error and the individuals start expecting the values. So to counterbalance that, we have to present these values in a different or random order and ask the individual to whether he or she heard the sound or not. This means he or she has to reply either yes or no. That is the total procedure of method of constant stimuli. I think it is a bit clear to you. Now, from the recorded responses, so we have presented the individual, we suppose, now we have completed the experiment. First, we have presented the 60 decibel sound. After that, we have presented the individual with a set of stimuli with different decibel sounds and in a random order. And we have recorded the response. So there are the 2 points here. You have to present this some 50 times or 40 times or 100 times as your requirement are. So now in that case the individual fatigue will give you the responses. You record the responses. From the recorded responses, the percentage of correct responses are calculated and plotted on a graph. The values of stimulus intensity are plotted on the x-axis. See here, this is the stimulus intensity. 30 decibel, 40 decibel, 50, 60, 60 was the base sound. That's why it is shown with the dotted lines. Then 70 decibels, then 80 decibels, or you can plot with the 90, or because you can keep it as 90, but you have not shown that. There is no response for that, but you can keep it there. So remember this point. The stimulus intensity is plotted on the x-axis, whereas the percentage of correct responses on y-axis. Now, how you calculate the percentage of correct responses? You have to do that. You have to ascertain that how many trials you are given, or how many times you have responded. Out of that, how many are correct? Suppose you are given a 40 trials in 40 times, and out of the 40 times, if the individual is responding 10 times for the particular stimulus, yes or no. This is, and one important point again is here is on the y-axis, percentage of correct responses only you have to plot. Suppose you are given 50 trials. In 50 trials, in the 30 decibel sound, he has only 10 times out of 50. He's only 10 times he said that I could hear the sound. So what the percentage? Out of 50, 10 times only. This means a 20%. For 30 decibel sound, you have to plot, mark a point at 20. Getting my point? So this way you have to calculate the percentage of the correct responses and you plot on the y-axis. Then you mark the dots as you plot in the various normal graphs. So you have to mark those dots, and these dots has to be joined by a free hand line. ठीक? Then a line joining the points will be drawn, and subsequently absolute threshold is calculated from the graph. The method is used to detect the differential threshold or just noticeable difference too. So how you will calculate from that? So you have to see the top threshold. Top threshold means the last at the 80 decibel, various the percentage of the correct responses will be higher, whereas at 30 decibel it will be the lowest. So it will be the average of all these. You add all the responses, calculate the mean, and finally calculate the super mean. That's the mean of all the responses. So that will be your absolute threshold. Similarly, this method is also employed for the calculating the differential threshold, or we can call it the just noticeable difference. So this difference, this was the methods of constant stimuli. Now let us discuss something about the method of limits. So you know what the difference between method of constant stimuli and method of limits. Now I'll also tell you why it is known as method of limits. There is a one basic difference. In method of limits, we present the stimulus in an order, whereas in method of constant stimuli, we present a set of stimuli that have a fixed value in a random order. Here we present in a sequence or in order. So this is a basic difference. Now the point is, what is method of constant stimuli? That is method of limits. It means determining the detection limit of a stimulus. I'll let you know what is this. In this method, both ascending or descending series of stimuli can be used. So, same, there is a basic question students can raise here is why it is known as method of limits. This is a very good question and very pertinent question that needs to be answered here. Because why it is known as is the individual or the subject has to detect a limit of the stimuli where it is perceptible, means the particular limit, particular point where stimulus either is perceptible or completely not perceptible in 50% of the time. That limit we have to detect, that limit we have to find. So that's why it is known as method of limits. So in this method we can use both either descending series or the ascending series. Now what is ascending or descending series? So let us explain. Ascending means particular to the stimulus intensity. Means the presentation of stimulus will start with the low intensity. Means ascending series, it will be increasing systematically. It will increase proportionately or with equal increments. It will increase. So it means the presentation of stimulus with should start with low intensity and gradually increasing with small equal increments till it is detected. See, it is here detected 50% of the total responses. This means you have to reach up to a limit where the stimulus can be detected in 50% of the trials. That's why this method is known as method of limits. So, contrary to that, we have another technique that is called descending series. In descending series, it is just opposite to the ascending series. Here, the presentation of stimulus should start with high intensity and gradually decreasing the stimulus value in small and equal increments till its detection is pursued only in 50% of responses or detection is negated in 50% of responses. Means here both ascending and descending series, it's a both concept. Either individual detects the stimulus in 50% of the trials or it negates, that it doesn't exist in 50% of the trials. This is known as the descending series and this is method of limits. The method is generally used in audiometry. a science where the measurement of hearing is being studied in various aspects, various physical properties, various situations, all and all. This is a different point here. So if someone asks you where we generally utilize these methods, you can call it a method of limits. It's generally and most widely used in the science of audiometry. Thus, this is a response sheet of the individual. Just you can have a glance at that. See, this is the stimulus intensity 10 decibel. Okay, it was no. Then how many people detect it in when it is a descending series? Yes, yes represent the detection, whereas y represent the yes detection, whereas no represents as the negation. There is a no detection. So this way you have to make a response of the individual, and from that we calculate absolute threshold and differential threshold. So we'll be not discussing here how to calculate the AL and calculate the DL. That's a part of practical, which we have discussed in our practical, which we have calculated. If you remember, my dear friends, in my classroom, we have conducted an experiment on detecting the absolute threshold by weights, that is by constant stimuli. So we'll be discussing that part in our practical video. Now, see, in this method, importantly, that is in the method of limits, we use three variation techniques. What are the variation techniques? The first two, so you have to make a differentiate between what the two important points discussed above, that is ascending series and descending series. Here is the three variation techniques. In the variation in which? Variation in the uh, stimulus intensity. So, but ascending series was different, and first and descending series were different. Here the techniques are up and down or staircase. This is the first technique. It is used to explore the transition points, means how to calculate the AL and DL. This up and down or staircase method is that is a technique of the method of limits to explore the transition points. What are the transition points? Points where subject reverses her or his responses. Suppose that you are conducting an experiment on an individual and you ask whether you hear the sound. That individual responded yes. Again, you vary the stimulus intensity and ask, did you hear the sound? You say yes, yes, yes. And there is a point comes, you are decreasing the sound intensity. When there is a point come, the individual say no, then say no, then no. So from yes to no, that is the transition point, because here individual or testee or the subject reverses his or her response. Getting my point? So the average of transition point is known as the threshold. This is you have to calculate all the transition points as in the shown in the graphical representation here, and you find out the average. So that average will be taken as the threshold of the stimulus. So second technique is the threshold tracking. First one was the up and down or the staircase method. The second technique is the tracking the threshold. It was the first used by the Baxter in 1947. In this variation technique, the variation in the intensity of stimulus is regulated by the subject. This is a very important point here. In threshold tracking, the changes in the stimulus intensity will be done by the subject herself or himself. Researcher won't have any interference as far as the regulation of the intensity of the stimulus is concerned. So as long as subject keeps the button pressed, there are the button that subject has to keep it pressed, the stimulus will gradually decreases. And as long as the button is released, the intensity of the stimulus will be automatically increases in the equal amounts or equal intensity. And the experiment can be started either with the pressed or released state of button. So in this technique, in this variation technique, the variation in the stimulus intensity, that is known as threshold tracking, the individual or the subject has to control the regulate the intensity of the stimulus. So he or she has to keep the button pressed. As long as the button is kept pressed, the stimulus will gradually decreases, keep on decreasing, and the moment uh, individual stop hearing the intensity of the stimulus, at that case he or she is required to release the button. The moment the button is released, the intensity of the stimulus will start increasing, and the moment the individual start hearing the stimulus of the sound, that he or she has to again press the button. So this is technique is known as the threshold tracking. And the third technique is important technique. Oh, this is the graphic representation. If the we start the experiment with the press state, then the stimulus will gradually decrease till it reaches a point of disappearance, which I told you. At this point, the subject will release the button, and stimulus will start to increase in the intensity till the point where it is becomes detectable. Again, at this point, the button will be depressed, and so on. This way, various trials will be taken, and these trials will be marked or represented in the graphical representation, and you have to calculate the AL or DL as desired by your experiment. Then, dear friends, comes the third variation technique, forced choice. You know forced choice? Yes, as you appear for different type of objective examination, there is some one question and there are different answers. So out of that answers, you have to only mark the correct answer. That is forced choice. You are forced to make a choice. That's why this technique is known as a forced choice. Now, here what is forced choice? In this context, the forced choice will be in context of the intensity, different intensities of the stimulus. First used by the Blackwell in 1953 as far as vision. Is conducted experiment on the visual stimulus and used this technique for choice in 1953, whereas Jones used this technique in 1956 in the taste and smell type of stimuli. This can be either temporal phase choice or spatial phase choice. So what is temporal? Name itself is a self-explanatory. Temporal means there should be some time gap between observations, that is in a sequence. In temporal force choice, the subject is presented with a set of 4 observations in a sequence. Getting my point? So all are observations in a sequence, 1, 2, 3 sequence wise. The subject is required to tell which observation contains the stimulus. This means 4 type of observation decibel sounds you made to hear a subject. So that is the 40 decibel, 50, 60 and 70. Out of that, you will ask, out of these 4 sound of intensity, which sound you can hear? This is he or she has to tell out of these 4 sounds only. This is forced choice, but it is in a sequence. First you say 40, then 50, then 60, and then 70, and you ask which sound you heard. You say the third sound, because you have to tell from that only. And this is a temporal, means that observations are presented, that the stimulus intensity is presented in a sequence. That's known as a temporal force choice. What is spatial force choice? While in spatial force choice, the information is presented to the subject simultaneously at one time. Spatial force choice, usually subject is presented with 4 quadrants. You know quadrants? If you cut a circle in 4 parts, that becomes quadrants, out of which one quadrant contains the stimulus, and 2 successive correct responses taken at the threshold of the stimulus. Let me explain in simple words. 4 quadrants means this simultaneously you are providing 4 type of information, 4 type of observation to the that is subject. Out of that, you have to, that individual has to respond in which quadrant or which part of that observation contains the stimulus. If the subject successively gives 2 correct responses, that we call it as a threshold of the stimulus. Dear friends, you may be feeling that little bit is the typical, but you know, physics, psychophysics, it's a science. We have to put a little bit more cognitive efforts. The moment you understand this concept, you need not remember that. They will be permanently embedded in your long-term memory. So, dear friends, this is the second part, that is spatial force choice. So, this was the third variation technique, force choice. Out of that first various techniques, we can offer the stimulus 2 types, that is temporal force choice and the spatial force choice. So, dear friends, let us move to the third method of adjustment, which is also known as the method of average error. The name itself is very self-explanatory. This method is basically used for the assessing the J and D or differential threshold. but also can be employed for the AL, that is absolute limit or absolute threshold. In this method, what we do is, it's a very simple method. The subject controls the intensity of the stimulus. So what the important point here is, see, in the method of limits and method of adjustment, that subject only controls the intensity of the stimulus. Initially, the stimulus is set to very low or very high intensity. The subject varies the intensity of the stimulus until it becomes perceptible or disappears completely. You know this method. This is a very simple technique. Now, further, what we have to do then? Dear friend, the mean of setting suggested by the subject for perception of difference is taken as an absolute threshold. So how we calculate the AL here? You ask the subject to take this knob in your hand and you say start and keep regulating the values of the stimulus. The moment you hear, you say I hear of that, and you know at which decibel the individual heard the sound. Then again it keep on decreasing. At what moment you start not able to listen the sound, you have to note down that. See, this means this way you have to note down all the observations and find out the average of that observations, and that will be your AL, means absolute limit or absolute threshold. While assessing the DL, the subject is asked to adjust the intensity of stimulus until it becomes differentiable. Differentiable means differentiable between two intensities of stimulus, and the mean of all stimulus intensities set by the subject is designated as a J and D or differential threshold. So dear friend, these are the three methods, and now let us important 2 point discuss this. We already know what these methods are used for. You know this method are used for the assessing the absolute threshold or absolute limit or detection threshold. What is that? Again, I'm repeating, the threshold of the intensity of stimulus required to perceive it, means 50% of the times. Then differential threshold or differential limit or JND, the minimum value required to differentiate between the two stimuli, we call it a differential threshold or DL. So the basic purpose of these three methods is to calculate or to assess the AL and DL. And dear friends, these are my references. You can cross check them, and you can. So my suggestion is you must read this book, Gaskaider's GA 1997, Psychophysics, the Fundamentals, a very important book for the psychophysics, and various other notes you can refer, various sites. So next we'll be discussing, will be we'll be entering into the second unit of the BF first year, second SEM, that is definition and meaning of learning. By the time, my dear friends, how you feel about my recordings, my videos, and my content of this, my videos. If you like it, love it, share with your friends. But the moment, or if you feel that if you dislike it, there is some shortcomings in my lecture or shortcomings in my speaking ability or in my contents, just you can email me at vermasujit@yahoo.com, or you can write in my comment box. I'll always wait for your comments, whether it may be appreciable or it is critical. Once again, my dear friends, thanks for watching this video.